All right. Now, item number 11, consideration of the CASA Compact, a 15-year emergency policy package to confront the housing crisis in the San Francisco Bay Area. Staff report, please.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'll be presenting this item tonight, and this item is on the agenda to inform the council and the public about the CASA Compact, which is a 15-year policy package to deal with the housing crisis. It's been developed by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments via a stakeholder committee. Thank you. And in order to actually have any of these things take effect, they would really need the state legislature to change the laws in the state of California, and that's essentially what this policy package is proposing, is that the legislators in Sacramento would enact new laws that would affect cities and housing in the Bay Area, focused on the Bay Area. So I'm going to run through there's 10 elements to this policy package. I'm going to just go through them with the council. The first one is called Just Cause Eviction Policy, and it would divide every eviction of any tenant into an at-fault eviction or a no-fault eviction. And an example of a no-fault eviction would be the owner of the property wants to move into the property and occupy it themselves, and we saw a lot of that after the fires, for instance. People moved into their second home if their home burned down. And then an at-fault eviction would be if someone's not paying the rent, as an example. It requires certain noticing from the landlords, and it would give the tenants a cure period if it was an at-fault eviction. And then if it's a no-fault eviction, for instance, if the landlord's home burned down, they want to move into their second unit or their second home, then they would pay relocation assistance to the tenant. So they would pay rent for the tenant in a new place under this proposal. Element number 2, there would be essentially a cap on the rent increases each year. This would go for a 15-year period, and there would be an annual max increase on rents of the cost of the consumer price index change plus 5%. It would apply to the renter and not the unit. So if a renter moves out, then the rent for that unit could be reset and it wouldn't be subject to that cap. Element number 3, I'm off on my thing here. Thank you. Element number 3 would provide emergency rent assistance to low-income people that, for instance, an example might be the government shutdown. If you had someone who was on a low income and they're not getting their payment, it's an emergency, they can't pay their rent, this would step in and pay people's rent for them. And then it would provide legal counsel to all tenants facing any eviction. So it would provide lawyers for tenants to sue or defend themselves against landlords. Element number 4, remove second unit regulations, and it would remove local city jurisdiction and regulation over second dwelling units, also known as accessory dwelling units. It would allow multiple accessory dwelling units in multifamily homes, and I think, and I don't know, but I think what is meant here by a multifamily home would be like in San Francisco where you have, family on one floor, family on a second floor, family on a third floor. They could then subdivide each of those floors into a second unit is kind of the idea there. And it would create a small homes building code. Right now, these tiny homes are really not fitting into any good regulatory scheme that the state has. The state has a code for mobile homes, it has a code for recreational vehicles, and it has a code for sort of regular houses. And the tiny homes are trying to sort of meet the requirements of being trailers, so they're putting them on wheels, but really there needs to be a code for small homes, and so this would ask the state, will you please develop a building code for small? Element number 5, this would establish minimum zoning near transit, so it would override any local zoning, and it would have a height of 55 to 75 feet around train stations, so that's like 5 to 7 stories more or less around train stations, and then 36-foot height near any high quality bus, which they define as 15 to 30-minute headways between buses. Element number 6, this would reform local government's approval process of housing. It places a number of restrictions on how cities process applications, adds a number of reporting requirements on cities, limits the number of public hearings that you can have on a project, and it changes how we set impact fees. And I'll just analyze this one a little bit. For us, our concern on this one is this would pull our staff off of building housing to do report writing, making lists, changing our impact fees. It would actually stall, I think, a little bit the production of housing that we're having, the success that we're having in Rohnert Park, if these things were handed down from the state as new requirements on us in particular. Element number 7, this would expedite the approvals and provide incentives for certain projects. It seeks exemptions from California Environmental Quality Act for certain projects. It would override and reduce for local requirements. For example, it cuts any local jurisdiction's parking requirement in half for a certain project. And then it would provide tax breaks for those certain projects. Element number 8, it is talking about using public land that's owned by public agencies for housing. And they're asking for the definitions of surplus and underutilized land to be redefined, and then changing the requirements on how that land is disposed of. It would require all cities and counties to make a list of all of their properties and then submit that to the state. It says that the state housing department can refer cities to the attorney general for enforcement of making these lists and disposing of this property, and then it would blanket zone all underutilized properties as being housing. Element number 9 is the funding and financing, and there's 2 parts to this. One is they want to raise $1.5 billion a year, and I'll tell you how they want to do that. The other part of it is they're seeking about $1 billion from state and federal sources. They're proposing 8 different new taxes, and the proposal is not all 8 of them would be implemented, but some combination of 8 of them to get to $1.5 billion. And those taxes include a quarter-cent sales tax, a tax on vacant homes. So if you did own a second home and you didn't occupy it, there would be a tax on any new commercial development, a affordable housing linkage fee, and they're proposing in the $20 range per square foot. For instance, Rohnert Park is more in like the $2 a square foot. It'd be 10 times as much. A tax on any business's gross receipts. So any business in the Bay Area take their gross receipts, and then they would charge them.
Does it get worse? Keep going.
I think it's 0.75% on their revenues. It would charge per employee. So any employer would have to pay, I think it's around maybe $48 per job. And then it proposes general obligation bonds, which typically are a property tax. It also proposes to take redevelopment money from cities. So for Rohnert Park, I estimate it would be about $200,000 a year from the city, and then about $15 million a year in taxes from Rohnert Park businesses and residents. Element number 10 would create a regional housing entity to do all of the things that are described in the other elements and report progress, manage the legal assistance, and they say that this new entity would be non-regulatory. The CASA Compact, in addition to the 10 elements, has a number of calls for action, and those are reestablishing redevelopment, lowering the voter threshold for taxes related to housing measures. So right now the threshold for special taxes, in other words, taxes that specify how the money will be used, the voter threshold for that is a 2/3 vote. What they're proposing, and there's actually ACA 1 is in the legislature right now, would lower the threshold for infrastructure and housing taxes to be 55% like it is for school districts. It would reform online sales tax to be the point of sale instead of the point of distribution. So currently, if someone buys something on, let's say, what's a good example? Online for Best Buy or something. Their distribution center is in Dinuba. They would get potentially the sales tax from that purchase versus Rohnert Park getting the sales tax from that if it's delivered to Rohnert Park. This is calling for that to be reformed. I think in general, because Rohnert Park doesn't have distribution centers for online purchases and sales, this would benefit the city. And they propose to reform Prop 13 to provide more money to cities that are creating housing, and that would tend to benefit, I think, bigger jurisdictions just because there's more number of units in those jurisdictions. But it's unknown how that would actually work. And then provide this program, this $2.5 billion is not directly focused on preventing or avoiding homelessness, although it may have that benefit if, for instance, rental assistance could keep people in their units and keep them from being evicted, and they may keep them from going into homelessness. But so separately, they have a call for action for the state that the state really needs to do more for funding housing for people who are moving out of homelessness. And then probably the recommendation in here that really actually maybe the most significant and the most important, but the hardest to do, is grow and stabilize the construction labor force. What we're seeing is just there's a lack of construction trades, especially in the specialties. The home building that's going on in Rohnert Park, a lot of them are coming from the Central Valley. There's just not enough skilled people working in construction trades for all the demand that there is right now. And so it's driving up the cost of construction of homes. So that is the informational report on the CASA Compact. This is, my understanding, is going to be voted on by the Association of Bay Area Governments Executive Committee later this month. And then I'm not sure when the vote would be at MTC, if it's even going to the full MTC board, but I think we have a MTC member that could probably enlighten us. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, if I might, because this is in the nature of a report from your MTC commissioner and the chair of MTC, who happens to be me. And the full commission did meet on December the 14th, and I was authorized to sign the CASA Compact subject to the following understandings. And in all likelihood, I will, or someone else will, introduce similar language on the 19th when the ABAG Executive Committee votes as to whether to authorize President David Rabbit to sign the CASA Compact. Both of us, for the record, voted to approve the compact as individual representatives of our organizations when the CASA Compact itself was finalized by the steering committee and moved forward. The authorization to sign does not constitute an approval of the compact itself. I mean, this language is very interesting. This authorization will enable the Commission to be proactively engaged as the process to implement the compact goes through the state legislature. This authorization should be accompanied by a comprehensive program of outreach to local government with adequate representation from local elected officials. The MTC ABAG legislative committees should include local jurisdictions in the development of compact advocacy. This authorization does not constitute an endorsement of any potential revenue source for housing. So my authorization, I think it's fair to say, is constrained. We'll leave it at that. And just, again, having sat for the last 18 months on the CASA steering committee, we should be aware that the staff members of the legislative housing committees, which are chaired by Assembly Member Chu from San Francisco for the Assembly Housing Committee, and State Senator Scott Wiener from San Francisco, who is now chair of the Senate Housing Committee, their staffs, and in fact, Assembly Member Chu was back at a field trip in New York City with us just 3 weeks ago. The legislature has been very intimately involved in these discussions as they have gone on. And so, as our city manager just mentioned, and if you look at Wiener's SB 50 and other activities and comments by the governor yesterday at the middle of the day, the phrase I'm using is that the CASA compact ship has sailed. It is now the subject of review by the legislature, and so I am hoping that at the end of the month that I will be meeting with the Bay Area Legislative Caucus when they meet in the last few days of January as these measures move forward. It's clear from the language that was given to me by the 14-3 approval vote in MTC that we anticipate that any legislation that emerges will be getting reviewed by both MTC and ABAG's legislative committees. I also would anticipate that the mayors and council members' legislative committees in the 9 counties would also be as part of the ongoing process. The compact is clearly a wish list of how this large umbrella organization representing developers developing large cities, the mayors of Oakland, San Jose, and San Francisco, all attended steering committee meetings. They were actively participating. So this is something moving forward in an attempt to address this shortage of housing. The governor has stated how many housing units he hopes can be built in the state of California. These are mechanisms which are particularly oriented towards the 9 Bay Area counties. And so I will be signing the compact on the 29th of January, along with, I don't know whether President Rabbit will get that authorization or not, can't say, but I will be there. And so that's my report to you as chair of them.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Stafford, do you have any questions?
Yes. What in the heck were they thinking? This is insane. I'm sorry. This is ridiculous. How does this help Rohnert Park? How does this help us in any way, shape, or form? I can't even believe on my thing here, all I could was put no, no, no. This is crazy. How does it help Rohnert Park?
It will help the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was sitting as chair of a regional body, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, where we are doing everything that we can to try to help resolve some of the problems that have been, frankly, created by the incredibly successful economy that we enjoy in the 9 Bay Area counties.
But can I just say that Rohnert Park is doing its job. We are doing what we're supposed to be doing. And this is not even taking into account anything that we are doing already. And San Francisco and San Jose get to dictate what we have to do and what our citizens have to do, that we have to pay. They have to pay parcel taxes, that we have to take our taxes to give it to other places to use when we are doing our job. That's not a question. I'm sorry.
That was a question.
It just doesn't even make sense to me. And I'm really disappointed that It's already being signed and already being moved forward when we haven't had the opportunity to weigh in on it in any way. And I think it's just a shame.
Hold that thought. Councilmember Adams, do you have any questions?
I'm anxious when Councilmember McKenzie said he signed it under constraint. I'm just curious what your constraints were. Can I ask him that question? Is that?
Sure, through me
Yeah,
to him.
I read out what the constraints are. We had a lengthy debate amongst the 21 members of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission as to whether they would authorize me to sign this compact, moving all of these various proposals forward with the understanding clearly that these are being proposed. They have to be translated into legislation or bond measures or whatever might be to advance the various options that are laid out. And as I tried to explain, as the legislative review process goes forward, we're committed, and we were committing MTC to be part of that review process. There's nothing in the compact that has committed the city of Rohnert Park to anything. There are very strong suggestions, obviously, from...
Can I just ask a question?
I'm authorized under the conditions that I laid out.
I'm going to go ahead and let her ask her question.
Yeah, no,
She asked me the question.
Yeah, she's got
but I mean, just have a follow-up question. If we could cut Rohnert Park out of this, I would say, wow, this is great. Go for it. Anybody who wants to be part of this. But I can't, in good conscience, support something that, I mean, I guess I shouldn't make any comment. That's my question. Can Rohnert Park be cut out of it?
What will end up being part of the legislation that's forwarded to the governor, and what may end up being presented as regional measures through legislation. And again, I'll just use the example of Regional Measure 3 in terms of the 9 counties in the Bay Area voting on the bridge tolls. That required a piece of legislation developed through the committee process that then went to the governor for signature that authorized a measure to be placed on the ballot.
Well, bridge tolls, have at it.
Well,
I mean, I'm just saying, and I understand what you're saying is you make a decision that involves the whole Bay Area, and I have respect for that. I'm just saying, in this case, I'm looking through it and I'm thinking, do you think Darren's presentation accurately reflects what's in that? Because I read his presentation and read the CASA report.
There would be impacts if some aspects of that were approved. Take a smaller example. If there were building standards established for tiny houses, that would impact. That would be we're proposing that would be a region-wide standard.
So, as you were going through this process, just taking that one, the additional dwelling unit, or whatever, with the ADUs, just having served on the Planning Commission, and we're basically following the state guidelines right now. And is there something different that you personally think, boy, this could be moved along? I mean, it just concerns me because Darren's reading is that you could take a 3-story house and divide it into 3 different units. When I read that, I thought, I can put 5 little tiny houses in my backyard and rent them out. So we're going to change the flavor of our neighborhoods, and I understand a problem in this city. In other words, the problem in San Francisco and Oakland and San Jose, I guess I'm asking you.
One size clearly doesn't fit all, I think, is the statement that I have heard many times. And I think that would be a fair statement. I think that as specific legislation develops, then we as a city, we as the Mayors and Council Members Association and other entities have the opportunity to talk to our representatives and see where specific legislation ends up. Some of this legislation has already been proposed. I mean, there's a reality in terms there will be legislation in front of the legislative committees on zoning in transit-oriented development areas. That's Wiener's bill. 827 from last year has been reproposed after many discussions. So I'm obviously listening to what you're saying. I'm obviously, well, it may not be obvious, but I am your representative on ABAG's executive committee. And I'll obviously be reporting what I was authorized to do by MTC, but I will also reflect what I'm directed to reflect by this council as your representative.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I have also spoken very strenuously about the fact that there are cities who do have general plans, who do use specific plan mechanisms and development agreements, and who are building houses. In fact, I've actually been in touch with staff as we've been having these discussions to let people know what our permitting fees are, because there were reports coming in that were frankly not realistic. So my authorization, however, was as I read out. I mean, the first line, the authorization does not constitute an approval of the compact itself. MTC did not give approval of the compact itself. It basically says that we're going to continue to enter into discussions as this compact is moved forward. It will move forward, but it's already moved forward. That's the point of my remarks, was to say that the legislative staff were actively engaged as the compact was being put. The legislation is starting to emerge. The governor has, and I've said this to mayors and council members more than once, that there was going to come a time in 2019 when this was going to be a hot button item in the legislature and the executive branch of government, and it already is, and the governor said so yesterday. So,
Any other questions?
I have lots of comments.
I will come back for comment. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
You bet. Just one. You said there was a vote, and it was a 14-3 vote for you to sign that?
yeah.
Can you give me the names of the three people? I want to send thank you letters to them.
Yeah, you're welcome. Give Damon a call. Give your Marin representative a call. And no surprise, Connolly voted against. Give Ginny Bruins in Santa Clara counties. You can give her a call. And give Carol Dutra-Bernat, Chief County. These were the three no.
I'll have comment in a minute.
Okay. I do have some questions. I'm just curious, since this is a kind of a regional play and look on things, why this wasn't brought as a presentation for feedback to the mayors and council members meetings that we have on an ongoing basis.
I have endeavored to get the attention of the Sonoma County mayors and council members to this project. We have sent materials out. I have, frankly, and this is no surprise. Let's be blunt. Until the compact became a reality, the level of interest.
I'm curious as to.
I mean, I'll show you in the minutes that I had brought this up in my.
No, that's fine. But I'm also curious, and this is nothing against you. I don't want to feel personally attacked, please. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to
I'm
understand
fine.
it.
I have a thick skin.
I know you do. But I'm also wondering about getting input from your own council, having some kind of a workshop or some kind of feedback before you voted on December 14th. I was just curious, at least on our
representative.
on that kind of a level, if that had come up with other cities and other city councils as well throughout the Bay Area.
Yeah, there's been a very strenuous and vociferous number of people who have been expressing views similar to views that have been expressed at this time.
No, I'm not asking about views. I'm talking about feedback. That, in other words, reaching
We've
out
been getting feedback.
from your local councils, as
Well-
a presentations being made, saying this is what. Can we get your feedback on zoning and housing and land use?
In other words, every other meeting that you have that you're involved in, you give us reports, you say, here, I'm going to be voting on this. We didn't hear nothing about it until it was voted on. That's what I think some of us are upset with.
I'm just going
That's fine, and we have been taken to task, and I think it's fair to say that the authorization should be accompanied by a comprehensive program of outreach to local government, and it's been recognized that as the steering committee was going forward, that we were not doing an adequate job. And I guess in retrospect, I should have asked for a specific agenda item on our council agenda and forced you to walk through the compact negotiations. Mea culpa.
I have a couple of questions just on 5, 7, 8, and 9. On 5, minimum zoning near transit, I'm just wondering how this, if there's been any thought, might affect our Station Avenue project. And, or my concern is the language on this is so broad, and has there been any, it talks about,
There was discussion last year, AB 2923, Choose Bill, to authorize BART, development on BART properties, transit-oriented development on BART properties to come under the control of BART, and there was suggestion at that time that SMART should have been included in that language. It wasn't. That horse is also bolted out of the stable door. I mean, we're doing under priority development area and under transit-oriented development all of the things that we've done, and I don't believe that whatever the legislation is, it's not going to be retroactive.
but we're not 100% sure.
I suppose I suppose it's possible that somebody might say, well, you're retroactively that all of the legal actions that we have taken could be undone. It seems to me most unlikely.
Well, if I may, Mayor, it will depend on how the legislation comes out, but at least on its face, this would change the zoning within a quarter mile of train station to have a minimum or allow mid-rise residential construction up to 55 feet tall, 75 feet tall with a density bonus. It would also require project 20 units or more to include affordable housing. So it would change the zoning regardless of what, it could change the zoning regardless of what we've adopted. But it would take a developer to come in with a new proposal to actually change their project, right? So that's you may not see any difference on the Station Avenue project if they keep proceeding with what their approvals. It won't take away their approvals, but it would give them a different zoning on that property that would allow heights that are higher than what we're.
So they could add more units.
So that's exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then they could turn around and say the portico changes, everything within that train station area changes,
Yes.
and this is what we're going to do.
We're going to
And-
do a 7-story building.
Yeah, and if you combine potentially 5 with 7, then it could exempt them from sequel review because they're next to a train station.
Yep.
And it could give them tax breaks as well.
That should have definitely came to us.
So if I was a developer, it would be advantageous for me to want this to go through. At least
Well,
that
yeah,
particular developer.
So somebody asked, what were they thinking? And it's really a plan that's written by affordable housing developers, and big cities. And they're thinking about how can we incentivize and have construction of housing in our cities, and how can we raise money that will flow into our cities and into our development projects. And pretty clear that's what they were doing. And the goal is to get more housing, right? But each stakeholder brings their own perspective on how to accomplish.
Right. I'm just curious on the parking issue. I think what is concerning for me, and part of my question is, a city that doesn't have good public transit and infrastructure, the only way for people to get around is by car, unless you want to do a bus for an hour and a half to go 11 miles up the road to Santa Rosa. So was that taken into consideration, the outlying cities, or again, was this mostly just looking at, I know San Francisco's cut their parking in half, and I think Oakland's doing the same thing in San Jose. Was there any consideration for the smaller cities who don't have that infrastructure of a BART access or a SamTrans or?
I think this is what will come out in the legislative process. In fact, this is a region-wide view of how to deal with a crisis, and that, in fact, we happen to be one of the jurisdictions who are actually building houses, but there are a large number, and our county to the south, there's no question why Connolly voted against the compact, because of their attitude towards housing construction.
So was any consideration given to maybe using more of a carrot for those people that aren't performing than a stick for everybody?
Well, to be very straightforward about it, yes, the carrots, the financial incentives are going to be required, but there have been no sticks. And this is, frankly, an effort to drive the production of housing where there's been I can't remember the numbers, what the ratios are, but there's 80,000 housing units being built where there need to be 300 units built. So this is an effort to close that.
On the only two other questions I have, vacant homes, is that really referring to like Airbnbs or just homes that are literally sitting there vacant?
This is based on Vancouver, British Columbia, and particularly where there are investments in houses then stay vacant. Could also be properties in other jurisdictions around.
Okay. Gross receipts. I don't know if you have very many business owners that are predominantly small business owners that gave input on this, but it would be great to talk to business owners because taxing business owners on gross receipt is pretty crazy.
Definitely moving out of California quick as can be.
Or closing businesses. When you have businesses that small businesses do a few $1 million and you're taking that right off the gross, let alone salaries and benefits and everything else that has to be paid. The perception is there's a lot left for a small business, and there's actually not. There's not very much left for small businesses. So just, I don't know if that was put into consideration, but sometimes when business owners aren't sitting at the table, they don't get the voice. And if you didn't have any, you might want to talk to some business owners. And I don't, maybe my question is, I don't know if you did. Now that all these questions have come, I do want to give you two pluses. One is, I'm surprised, and maybe you can help me understand, the reestablishment of redevelopment, I think, is probably the biggest key. That's what was taken away. I'm curious to why this was done rather than saying, let's really reestablish the old redevelopment with some safeguards.
Because they don't get the money for that.
And they don't distribute it.
And would any of those redevelopment funds come back to Rohnert?
Yes. I think it's laid out in there that you know, the general, I think it's a 75% from source and 25. I can't remember exactly, but the whole question of redevelopment 2.0 is something, again, that is going to be debated in Sacramento. And so, as I told the mayors and council members last year, that there needs to be very close attention paid to the housing legislation that will be introduced. Some of it will reflect what's in the compact, and some of it will reflect, you know, ideas that Chair Chu and Chair Wiener have, and were already widely discussed, and in the case of Wiener's 827 last year, were soundly defeated in committee, which has had him out beating the bushes and talking to people all over the state of California as to what might be reasonable in terms of zoning changes as far as transit-oriented development. So this whole subject of discussion tonight, I've been listening very carefully because I will be going to the ABAG Executive Committee meeting. But what I'm really interested in is the Bay Area Legislative Caucus and the people who want to have an impact on this, and that's all of us. I need to be talking to Cecilia Aguirre Curry, who's our Assembly Representative, and State Senator Bill Dodd.
My only other question, Jake, is MTC is Metropolitan Transportation, and you know, having just come back from Europe, where we traveled via many modes, but I have to say we never rented a car. We were able to take express trains from one city to another city, so from a little city to a big city. I kind of look at the Bay Area, and one of the things that I've noticed that's lacking is express trains for us in Sonoma County to get down to San Francisco, from people from Solano County to get to San Francisco. There's nothing in here about improving transportation. And so I'm just wondering, you know, at what point do we as a community and a government body throughout the Bay Area really commit ourselves as MTC to regional transportation?
We have the Regional Transportation Plan, which is an integral part of Plan Bay Area 2040. We're currently updating Plan Bay Area 2050 that starts us off. I'm quite happy to give my transportation lecture about the fact that we have 28 separate transit agencies in the San Francisco Bay Area, one of which you serve on,
Yep.
by the way.
Yep.
And we also are a state where there seems to be a problem creating high-speed rail, the mechanisms that are available in most civilized countries. There's a state rail plan that was just approved last year, which would have connections between Novato and Cordelia Junction, connecting us with the main lines in California. And the problem is money. And I could go on about federal funding of infrastructure and how, in fact, we could find ourselves with a seamless transportation system throughout the Bay Area, but we still operate as Metropolitan Transportation Commission, but there is a statutory required link for us to discuss housing as well as jobs, as well as transportation, and Regional Measure 3 that I mentioned, Senate Bill 1, that was not undone by Proposition 6, gives us some money to start working on some of the problems, but the connection between the smart rail, which the state admires highly, and the connection with the Capital Corridor across the North Bay, just for example, is a project that has now been subject to engineering design, but will it be in my lifetime? I wish I could say it would be, but we have not divorced ourselves from transportation at all, but we are, we have found through the Plan Bay area the need to work on housing as well as transportation. And in fact, our staffs are now combined, as I've told you, and over the past number of year and a half or so, we now have an integrated planning division, and we will be looking at governance, regional governance, and whether or not we should combine the ABAG and the MTC governing bodies to have a more regional approach to transportation and housing.
The thought would be that if you could do this for housing, maybe you could do it for transportation.
Well, and my response to you would be that through our regional transportation plan, we already endeavor to do that, but one of the problems that we have in the Bay Area is that we have 28 transit authorities, and at this time we do not have a metropolitan transit authority to integrate all of the schemes. The best that we can point to an integration is the Clipper system, which was a monumental task to coordinate the fare card for all of these 28 systems, which we've actually accomplished. But if you study the history of BART only being operating in 3 counties and the refusal of other counties to entertain the thought back in the 50s and 60s of a more regional rail system, then all I can say is the short-sightedness of the past is now haunting us.
Councilmember Stafford, discussion, please.
Yes, the recommended action is actually asking to us develop a position, and my position is absolutely, this is no. One of the biggest things it starts with, if they want to create a new regional housing enterprise to do all these different things, well, we don't need another agency created to tell us what to do when we're already doing it. We don't need our zonings changed. We don't need our development changed. We are doing the job that we're supposed to be doing. We don't need money taken from our community to be sent to other places. We don't need to ask our taxpayers to pay more to be sent to other places. I just am absolutely opposed to this whole thing. There's very little value in it. I think it's a great idea. Let's improve housing. But to impose all these things on everyone, it's just not reasonable, and local control is totally lost. We lose all our control, and I just think that's just not appropriate. And Jake did say, one size doesn't fit all, but this does not fit Rohnert Park. So my position is no.
Thank you. Councilmember Adams.
My position is no as well, but I do have some comments I'd like to read for the record so that we can send them with Councilmember McKenzie when he reports back, so that he can accurately reflect the things that we're saying rather than just kind of recall them from the general tone of the meeting. Is that possible to do that?
Or would you be interested in sending a letter from the entity of the council?
I think that would be a great idea. Thank you very much.
If you want to go ahead and read your comments.
So this is one case where I think governing by initiative is going to come in really handy. Because when you tell the people of the state of California that you're going to change Prop 13, you're going to have a big non-starter. The second thing is, I've heard from a number of different people that what is Rohnert Park doing? You're building, you're the easiest place to do business with. It's a very complimentary of our city staff and our planning department especially. And I've said to those people, Rohnert Park would be happy to come and put on a clinic. And I think that maybe having Rohnert Park come and put on a clinic for some of these other people, this is how it's done. I mean, Marin County is going to be intransigent no matter what you do. That's not our problem. Our problem is I can't in good conscience support. I understand what you want to have happen here. You want to have more affordable housing. And I think that's a great goal. And that's probably the end of my agreement. I have a very hard time thinking that, I have two houses, one burns down, I want to move into the other, and I've got to help the people who are in there move out and give them some subsidy. I can't support that. I believe we're going to lose local control. I go back to just reiterating, if you're going to change Prop 13, that's going to be a problem. I'd have a very difficult time if what City Manager Jenkins says is accurate, that this will cost Rohnert Park, and I think he's being extraordinarily conservative in the wrong direction, $200,000. 25% of that's going to go out of the area, 75% is going to come back to Sonoma County. How much of that 75% is actually going to come back to Rohnert Park? If we're going to do that, we're already doing that. We're doing everything that is in here that is under our control. I understand the want to lower the threshold to 55% for local measures to match what's going on in the schools. But generally, overall, I just don't think this is the direction that we ought to go. I also feel very, very concerned about taxing our residents $15 million for this. If that $15 million is going to come all back into Rohnert Park, that's fine, but we're going to give $15 million to who, to do what, managed by who? That concerns me on very, very many levels. I mentioned the relocation fees paid by the landlord. That concerns me greatly. Having rent control imposed upon a city when the city or county has said they don't want that, I think that's a problem. Rohnert Park, in my understanding, is already doing, kind of leading the area on ADUs. I think Rohnert Park could put on a clinic. It concerns me that my husband and I are looking at putting an ADU in our backyard. We can go up to 900 square feet without any problem, but looking at this, it looks like we could put maybe 1, 2, 3 of those in our backyard. That's going to change the whole flavor of our neighborhood. I don't think my neighbors are going to be happy with that. I'm concerned that we'll be mandated to have 55-foot tall buildings around the train station. I think that this imposes requirements on local jurisdictions that we haven't asked for and that we don't need in Rohnert Park. I think having state regulated CEQA exemptions foisted upon us again, I think that's something that's very disconcerting. Sitting on the Planning Commission for the last 15 years or 14 years and seeing that a regional agency is going to say, you know what, we're just going to cut your parking requirements in half. I call out as examples of trying to go to Target, Safeway. If we don't have a lot more to build, but if we just get to cut it in half, that's not going to make people happy, I don't think. My other question is, you mentioned the transportation issue is intransigent because we have however many, 20, did you say 23? 28. I remember when I was younger, my father served on the city council. I said, why don't we have a train coming up here? And he said, because you have 50 agencies and you can't get all those 50 agencies to agree on anything. I thought, what? That's a good answer. But this CASA document is suggesting that we take 9 Bay Area counties and the cities within those counties and basically force them to come to the table and give money to this project that requires housing. I mean, if that's your way to solve a problem, it seems like, why can't that be done in transportation if that's something that's so important to everybody? I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying if we're going to force people to do one thing, we're not very far away from forcing them to do another. And I guess my other question is, I understand the goals that are here, and you support the affordable housing, but I guess my question to you is, do you also support the fee structure that's sort of laid out how to pay for this? Raising taxes, taking money from Rohnert Park, raising Rohnert Park's taxes on our citizens. Do you support that as well?
If we're going to do something to resolve this problem, which is region-wide, then there have to be funding mechanisms. These are all proposals. There's a menu of them to be considered, and I not opposed to considering menus that include raising monies.
Thank you for your Thank you for your answer. Appreciate
Okay, Vice Mayor, comment.
I'm just very disappointed. As you went through the 10 elements, I tried to be positive and think, well, what good is coming out of that? And I just couldn't see anything that's going to help Rohnert Park. And I think, and this is on a personal note, I really think somebody has lost their way. And the way I see that is, we're elected by the citizens of Rohnert Park to represent what's best for Rohnert Park citizens. And I think that has been lost. We get on these committees, and I'll be honest, that's why I've been asked to be on committees, and I don't want to be on committees because I only care what's good for Rohnert Park, and that's why I'm up here. And I understand that you want what's best for the county or the state and all that, but I was elected from Rohnert Park to represent Rohnert Park, and there's not one god dang thing on there that is going to help Rohnert Park. It's all going to hurt Rohnert Park. So I'm very disappointed that, one, there was no discussion up here from anybody. And Jake, we have had you tell us every night about 5 committees that you're involved in, what's going on and what happening, and you're reporting out on this. Not once was this ever said, I want your input. I want your guys' input on this. Not once was that done. And I'm very disappointed in that. I mean, to me, personally, I think that you've maybe been on these committees way too long and it's time for change. And change is always good. I'm very disappointed that you support that you would say, yes, I agree that Rohnert Park residents should pay $15 million in taxes and employers should pay taxes. I'm an employee or employer. I think that's, pardon my French, but that is asinine. That every element on that is ridiculous. For you to sit here and say that Rohnert Park should be supporting the Bay Area, you know what? I've been saying that since I've been elected and before that. God dang it, do your job down there. They're not doing their fair share. They have not done their fair share for 50 years, and now you want us to pay for it? Are you crazy? That is ridiculous. I'm so upset with that you would do that and not report back to us and get our input. I see social media. I see you on social media, how you berate our president, and I agree with most of that because he's a dictatorship. What the hell is this? This is almost like a dictatorship. You want all of us to pay for that thing. That's crazy.
I guess you're not listening to a word that I've been saying.
No, I have, Jake. I have.
I'm not going to let you get away with this nonsense.
Go ahead. I think that's this CASA compact is a joke. I really do, and I'm so disappointed.
So,
Excuse me, Madam Mayor, I don't believe Mr. McKenzie was given an opportunity to make comments.
he did.
No,
I paused, so
okay.
I thought he was going to.
Mr. McKenzie has said his piece.
All right, just want to make sure you...
I will report to the ABAG Executive Committee whatever the council direction is. As council, I would point out that I represent the Mayors and Council Members Association on the ABAG Executive Committee, and I represent the County of Sonoma on MTC, and I take these responsibilities and continue to so do.
So, just some comments. I think what is probably most troubling to me is when you put a city like Rohnert Park in a situation where we might have to pay $15 million. You know, we don't have a lot of deep pockets in Rohnert Park. We're a little itty-bitty community. We don't have people that have multiple acres or wineries or pear orchards or whatever. We're mostly just apartments and single-family homes. And to take $15 million out of the city of Rohnert Park to go down and help offset housing in other areas, I think does a disservice to our community. But what probably bothers me more than anything is that local jurisdictions were not asked for feedback and input. And I totally understand there is a housing crisis. I absolutely get there's a housing crisis. And, you know, I think we have some cities that are very happy with the way that they look, and they want to stay that way, and they are entrenched and not doing anything. And so what I find is when I have an employee, this is the only way that I can relate it, is when I have an employee who is entrenched and doesn't want to do something, I deal with that employee. I don't put new things through to the whole staff because of one person or because of two people. And what I'm troubled with is that a lot of this came out during the holiday seasons when some of us were away or on vacation and had other things going, and voting was happening. And it feels like we didn't matter. It feels like our community didn't matter. And that, I think, is the opposite. People are trying to help solve a problem, but what could be happening is problems being made worse. So what I would like to propose to the council is that we write a letter to our state representatives, because apparently if the ship has left the dock, we should let our state representatives know exactly how we feel, of what our concerns are and how this impacts Rohnert Park. We could also then give that letter to Councilmember McKenzie so that he could share it. And what I would propose is that the city manager, who has kind of really, I think, a very strong grasp of kind of how this hurts us and maybe some of the concerns that you've heard, he could develop a letter that then as the mayor I could sign, and then we could send it out. And I would also say that this letter perhaps should, again, it's up to council, but be shared with all of our cities in the mayors and council members of what our concerns are as well.
Totally agree.
I agree also.
Yes.
Good idea.
Fair enough.
Be very precise, please.
Okay? Do you have enough information to craft a letter, or are you needing clarification?
Let me know if you need help writing it.
So the proposal is that we would write it and we'd sign it and we would send it. Council obviously get a copy, but another alternative would be to bring the draft letter.
The only concern I have is that they're voting on it on the 19th.
Okay.
And it's up to the council.
No, I have no problem you emailing it to us so we could see it, but I would trust it. I think you know where we're coming from, and I have no problem signing it and seeing it after it's signed. I think
You
it's...
wouldn't be able to edit it.
No, exactly, but see a copy of it.
City Attorney, did you
Well,
have
in these situations, one option is to have the mayor work with the manager to
Totally agree.
to draft a letter, and then once it's completed, send a copy to the council.
Very good.
everybody okay with that?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. All right, we will move forward with that. Moving on